Within a dark and menacing castle, the Demon Lord is getting ready to begin his conquest to take over the world, and to do that, he summons his 4 demonic generals: Olmandra the Inferno, Sylphid the Storm, Gnome the Earthen Bastion, and finally he summons the most cynical and soulless of them all, an underpaid Japanese salaryman. Denosuke started working for his company as an insignificant salaryman, but he was hope-filled, and surely he would make his way up the promotion ladder at some point. However, while Denosuke was working hard for the sake of the company, his colleagues were all kissing up to their boss, so they ended up getting promotions while Denosuke ended up getting shipped off to another country to work on expansion. Upon arrival, Denosuke found that literally nothing was getting done because the site had no funding. He tried to convince his boss to approve more funding so they could buy the necessary equipment, but that would cost money, so his boss refused and yelled at him for wasting money. The locals couldn't care less about the job if they weren't going to be given the necessary tools, so they left and Denosuke ended up having to do everything by himself. However, after seeing how hard Denosuke was working even though he was by himself, the locals were inspired and soon returned to help him out. But just when he finally got everything up and running, he had a call from his boss, and at first he thought his hard work was finally being recognized, so he would be getting a much-needed bonus. But he was dead wrong. They didn't even throw him a pizza party. All he got in return for his hard work was even more work, as they decided to transfer him to another country for a separate expansion project. By this point, Denosuke had begun to question his life choices because he realizes that he is wasting his life for a company that clearly doesn't care about him. But while he is distracted by his existential dread, he isn't paying attention to his surroundings, so he ends up getting run over by Moped-kun. That kind of explains how he ended up here. But Denosuke thinks there must have been some kind of mistake because there's no way the Demon Lord meant to summon a guy like him. However, the Demon Lord calls him by name and tells him that he summoned him here to become his new overseas manager. He has received extensive reports on all the hard work Denosuke had put in. He was assigned to an overseas branch of his company, learned the local language, and gained the trust of the locals to successfully run the new business. That is why the Demon Lord thinks Denosuke would be the perfect candidate for one of his 4 elite generals. Denosuke is kind of happy since this is the first time anyone has ever actually acknowledged all the hard work he has been putting in, but he is a bit hesitant to accept the position of Demon General, because that would technically mean he is betraying humanity. However, the Demon Lord mentions that the position will come with full workers' benefits, and all of a sudden, Denosuke doesn't think joining the Demon Army is such a bad idea anymore. On top of that, the Demon Lord actually respects workers' rights, so he won't force Denosuke to accept the position if he doesn't want to. All this makes Denosuke really want to join. When he thinks about it, he remembers how he was always treated like trash back in his old company, and he doesn't think trash like him deserves to have such an important job, so he is about to reject the Demon Lord's offer. But before he does, the Demon Lord yells that he can't let the way he was treated at his former company dictate his worth. That place was run by obnoxious and selfish managers who only cared about themselves, so they would never pay attention to all the work Denosuke was putting in behind the scenes. But the Demon Lord won't make that mistake because he is well aware of how valuable Denosuke is as an employee. So will he choose to go back to his old company and be treated like trash once more, or will he stay here and help build the Demon Army? Denosuke is still a little hesitant to accept, but all of a sudden, Olmandra speaks up and says she objects to the idea of having a weak human in the Demon Army. Sylphid and Gnome also object to the idea because they can't see how someone like him could possibly help the Demon Army. The Demon Lord understands why they would be skeptical, so he decides to put Denosuke through a test to show the others just how capable he really is. Denosuke starts freaking out and tries to explain to the Demon Lord that he has no powers, so he can't fight, but it's already too late because Olmandra has decided to attack him at full force to see what he's made of. She heard something about otherworldly humans possessing special powers, so tells Denosuke to try and stop her deadly kick. However, before the kick could land, the Demon Lord steps in front of her and stops it. Olmandra asks why the Demon Lord interrupted her, but he points out that she didn't wait for him to finish talking, so she ended up misunderstanding the situation. Look at poor Denosuke over there, he got so scared that he passed out from the shock. The others are surprised because Olmandra wasn't even trying that hard, so for Denosuke to pass out from an attack like that, it makes it seem like he's just a regular human. The Demon Lord tells them that Denosuke really is just a regular human, and that makes them all object to the decision even more. The Demon Army is made up entirely of monsters, so if a human were to enter the power struggle between the demons and demi-humans, then he would get eaten alive almost instantly. The Demon Lord admits that there is a bit of friction between the factions of his army, But that's exactly why he needs Daisuke and his skill set. He doesn't expect him to have a sturdy body or incredible attack power, but rather what he expects from him is his resourcefulness. Just then, Daisuke finally regains consciousness and begins pleading for them to let him go because there's no way he can deal with attacks like what Olmundra just tried to hit him with. The Demon Lord tells him to calm down and explains that he won't be expected to fight, but the Demon Lord does intend to give Daisuke a fitting exam. He explains that the demon army is currently trying to create a pact with the surrounding tribes, and so far they've managed to reach an agreement with the salamanders and werewolves, but negotiations with the Minotaur tribe has been quite difficult, so Daisuke's test will be to do whatever it takes to form a pact with the Minotaur tribe. With Daisuke's superb negotiation skills, it should be simple enough to gain the Minotaur's trust and reach an amicable agreement, but Daisuke doesn't see anything simple about negotiating with Minotaurs. However, the Demon Lord seriously believes he can pull it off, so he tells Daisuke to ask Olmundra if he has any questions. Afterwards, Olmundra leads Daisuke down the hall so he can begin negotiating with the Minotaurs. But she thinks this is a huge waste of time since there's no way a human like Daisuke can negotiate with Minotaurs. Daisuke thinks she's right about him being useless, but the Demon Lord seems so sincere when he was talking about how much he needed Daisuke, and all Daisuke has ever wanted was to have his hard work recognized, so he wants to live up to the Demon Lord's expectations of him as much as he can. Just then, Olmundra tells Daisuke that they've arrived at the meeting room where the chief of the Minotaur tribe is staying, and Daisuke is a bit shocked by the sheer size of the room, but Olmundra explains that it's perfectly normal since the Minotaurs are big monsters. And as a fair warning, she tells him that Minotaurs are known to be quite ferocious, so if he's not careful, he's going to end up getting himself trampled to death. As Olmundra opens the door, Daisuke has no idea what to expect from the Minotaur chief, but he intends to do his best to negotiate no matter what. However, once he actually sees the Minotaur chief, he freaks out. There's no way he could negotiate with someone like Terius without instantly dying. Olmundra feels bad for him, so she offers to help him out with the negotiations, and Daisuke is really thankful for the help. But then he sees Olmundra start arguing with Terius, so he gets the feeling that negotiations aren't going so well. Olmundra doesn't understand how Terius could be dissatisfied with everything they provided for him, and Terius says she doesn't understand what he's saying, so no headway is made on the pact, and Olmundra leaves the meeting room. Olmundra really doesn't understand why it's so hard for Terius to agree to the pact now when he was initially open to the idea. Just when they were about to finalize the agreement, he started yelling nay, nay over and over again. Olmundra came back several times to see if he would agree to the pact again, but all he would ever say was nay, so she couldn't understand what he wanted. Olmundra can't possibly see a resolution, so she's going to leave the rest for Daisuke to figure out, although she fully expects him to fail miserably. Daisuke starts having a full-on panic attack because he thinks there's no way to get around this mess, but as he is walking through the halls trying to figure out what to do, he spots a bar sign and decides to head in to clear his head. The bartender gets him a warm towel to calm him down, and Daisuke orders a drink while he sits down to think. He would like to work on the negotiations, but there's nothing he can do if the client refuses to negotiate. However, Daisuke then realizes that Terius might not actually be refusing to negotiate after all. He has experienced a situation like this before where a client was constantly telling him no, but when he looked into the client's eyes, he could tell what he really meant, and both sides were eventually able to reach an agreement. He now knows what he needs to do, so he finishes his drink and heads outside to do what businessmen do: negotiate. Meanwhile, Olmundra is back in the Demon Lord's throne room giving a report about her conversation with Terius, and it didn't lead to any meaningful breakthrough, so she doesn't think Daisuke will be able to achieve anything either, especially since he just arrived in this world today, but the Demon Lord still has faith in him, so he tells her to wait and see what Daisuke can accomplish. She doesn't understand what the Demon Lord sees in Daisuke, but she decides to go check up on him to see if he's alright, and when she does, she finds him in the process of stuffing several bags with hay. She asks him what he's doing, so he tells her that he intends to go have a good conversation with Terius. She tries to tell him that it's pointless since he's not willing to negotiate, but Daisuke still thinks there's a chance. He just needs to look Terius in the eyes and convey his emotions properly, so the two of them can understand each other. Olmundra notices that Daisuke looks a lot more confident than he did before, and without an ounce of fear this time, he walks into the meeting room to talk to Terius. The next morning, Olmundra comes into the meeting room to check if Daisuke is still alive, but when she looks inside, all she finds is a room full of hay, and neither Daisuke nor Terius in sight. At first, she thinks the negotiations must have failed, leading to a massive fight, but just then, Danusuke comes in and tells her everything is fine. In that case, she demands to know why there's hay all over their sacred demon castle, and more importantly, she asks where Terius went. Danusuke tells her that Terius is currently finalizing the pact agreement with the Demon Lord, but Allmundra can't believe Inosuke managed to get him to agree in just one night. He explains that he simply took the time to get to know Terius well, and that made the negotiation process really easy. Allmundra had thought Terius was refusing to negotiate because he kept yelling nay over and over, but in reality, Terius thought negotiations were going really well. Danusuke had experienced something like this before with an international client, and the client in question was really enthusiastic about saying no to him, so Danusuke thought the negotiation was going to end in failure. But to his surprise, the man then reached out for a handshake, so he realized it was all a misunderstanding. The same thing applied to Terius, so Danusuke did a little research into Minotaur culture and found out that Minotaurs always bring hay with them to act as their bed whenever they go to someone else's home. So all that time, he was just trying to ask for his hay. And when Danusuke figured that out, there were no more problems with the negotiation. Now, Allmundra realizes that she had misunderstood Terius and left him in that room to sleep on the cold floor, so she feels really bad. But Terius tells her it's alright since it was an honest mistake and shakes her hand to show that there are no hard feelings. As Terius is leaving, the Demon Lord comes up to Danusuke and Allmundra and asks Allmundra if she now understands why he wants to add Danusuke to their ranks. Allmundra admits that Danusuke really is skilled when it comes to negotiating, and since he passed the Demon Lord's test, the Demon Lord officially makes him one of his 4 generals and puts a bracelet on his arm as a symbol of his position. And as a sign of her new respect for Danusuke, Allmundra formally introduces herself to him and says she looks forward to working with him as a new friend. Danusuke is finally starting to settle into his role as one of the demon generals, and it's nice that he's got his own office and a supportive boss, but this place is still going to take some getting used to. Since he is officially one of the demon generals now, he thinks he should formally introduce himself to the others, so he heads to Sylphid's room and knocks on the door. To his surprise, a girl answers the door and asks what he wants, so Danusuke tells her he's here to introduce himself to Sylphid. The girl then coldly tells him that she's Sylphid's assistant, and he's a very busy man, so she can't let Danusuke disturb him. Danusuke is disappointed, but he knew he was bound to face some pushback from the other demon generals, so he decides to just come back later to try again. However, before he could leave, Allmundra comes running up to him because she has something important to say. The Demon Lord has another assignment for Danusuke, so Danusuke goes to meet with him immediately and is informed of an agreement he is working on. For the demon army to grow in strength, he needs the support of all the surrounding demi-human nations, and among all those nations, the Ogre tribe is particularly influential. They possess a military force equal to that of the demon army, and as a result, they could become a threat to the demon empire if they were to become hostile. That is why the Demon Lord wants to have a merger negotiation with them so they can combine their forces, but the ogres are notoriously difficult to negotiate with, so nothing has been decided on yet. However, with Danusuke on the case, the Demon Lord is sure he will be able to reach an agreement with them, so he is granting him full authority on the matter. Danusuke is glad to see that the Demon Lord trusts him so much that there's a real chance of him dying to the ogres if he goes alone, so Allmundra volunteers to escort him to the ogre tribe. However, before that, Danusuke says he wants to go meet with Gnome since she's in charge of the demi-human division of the demon army, and she might have some valuable information about the ogres. Allmundra thinks Danusuke is right, but she absolutely refuses to go anywhere near Gnome because she has generational beef with her. So instead, she says she'll go check on the carriages while Danusuke talks with Gnome. Danusuke heads out into the training grounds where Gnome is holding her daily training session, and he is impressed with what he sees because not only are Gnome's men skilled in combat, but she also keeps their morale really high. Once training is done, she turns to address Danusuke and asks what he wants. Danusuke tells her he's here to ask if she knows anything about the Ogre tribe, and she doesn't know much, but she tells Danusuke that their leader, Ogre, is notoriously difficult to have a conversation with, so he's going to have a hard time negotiating with him. There's nothing she can really do to help him on this one, and she would never want to work on anything with Allmundra anyway, so she asks Danusuke to get her out of here. Danusuke didn't even realize Allmundra had been standing behind him, so he asks her why she's here and why she's so angry. Allmundra says she already finished checking the carriages, so she came to get Danusuke since she was worried about him, but she can't contain herself after seeing Gnome, so the two start arguing, and Danusuke is starting to get worried about how much Allmundra and Gnome hate each other. Danusuke and Allmundra eventually arrive at the Ogre Castle, But before they could enter, they are stopped at the gate and told to wait until Ogier gives them permission to enter. Allmandra thinks it's ridiculous that they are being kept outside so long, but Danuske has seen this before and knows Ogier is just trying to use this to throw them off so they won't be able to negotiate. That's why it's important that they keep their cool, but Allmandra is on the verge of exploding in rage. Thankfully, before she could act out, Ogier's assistant comes out and tells the two that they may now enter, but as they walk in, Danuske notices how scruffy Ogier's armor look. Eventually, they make it to Ogier's throne room and come face to face with Ogier himself. But when Allmandra tries to start the negotiations, he tells her to shut up. He doesn't care why they are here because he's never going to listen to what they have to say unless, of course, they came to surrender to him. In which case he might hear them out, but only if they agree to kill their chief, the Demon Lord. Allmandra can't believe the levels of bullshit she just heard from Ogier's mouth, so she's about to crash out right now. But Danuske grabs her hand and tells her to calm down because a violent crash out is exactly what Ogier is hoping for. He then turns to Ogier, and in his most polite businessman voice, he says he and Allmandra are going outside to have a brief chat. Outside, Allmandra lets out all her rage and curses the very existence of Ogier for daring to say such a thing. She's fully prepared to go back in there and tear Ogier limb from limb, but Danuske calms her down and tells her they can't react to his provocation because that's exactly what he wants. He's intentionally saying things to get them angry in hopes that they cause a scene so negotiations break down. That way he can avoid directly rejecting the negotiation and blame its failure on the two of them. Now that she knows what Ogier was trying to do, Allmandra decides to calm herself down, but she's still really frustrated by the fact that Ogier insulted the Demon Lord. To be honest, Danuske is just as angry, but acting on that anger would only hurt their chances of success here, so they have to be careful about how they respond. With that said though, Ogier isn't willing to negotiate, so there's not much they can do at this point. Just then, the girl from before shows up, and she introduces herself as Ogier's daughter, Olulu. She knows this may come off as rude, but she has a request to make, so she asks for Danuske and Allmandra's help in dethroning her father. She leads Danuske and Allmandra to an empty room and explains that this is the food cellar, and as they can see, it has no food. The Ogier is known for its strength and influence among the demi-humans, but recently, they've run into financial trouble, and it has gotten so bad that a lot of their people are struggling to find food to eat. Danuske had assumed something like this was going on because when they came in, he saw the terrible state of the Ogier's equipment, along with the cold and empty feeling he got from the castle itself. This kind of situation usually occurs when large companies begin to decline. They make it seem like everything's going well, but on the inside, they are constantly on the brink of bankruptcy. That's exactly what's going on with the Ogier tribe, and Olulu believes that the only way to rebuild it is to rely on the demon army's help. However, her father refuses to listen to her, and on top of that, he is currently sick. They've been trying to keep this fact hidden, which is why they had Allmandra and Danuske wait outside while they prepared him for the meeting, but his condition just keeps getting worse, and soon he's going to pass away. If Ogier were to die with things as they are now, it would be the end of their tribe, so she pleads with Danuske to help her. Danuske says he understands her concerns, but he also scolds her for sharing such vital information. As the daughter of the chief, she needs to be more careful about the people she trusts, but Olulu can tell that Danuske is a good person. She's pretty confident in her ability to discern the nature of people, which is why she told him about the situation, and now she asks Danuske to help her save the Ogier tribe by marrying her. After hearing this, Danuske freaks out and Allmandra begins burning with rage, but Olulu is serious about her proposal. All the Ogiers in her tribe are as dumb as rocks, so the only way for Olulu to ensure the prosperity of the demon army is for a smart guy like Danuske to marry her and become the new chief. Danuske tries to talk Olulu out of making any rash decisions, but Olulu is convinced this is the only way to save the Ogier tribe, so she's willing to make their marriage official immediately, but Allmandra doesn't let that happen. Later that night, Danuske is sitting in his office and wondering how he's going to get himself out of this mess because Ogier refuses to negotiate with him, and Ogier wants to marry him. He can't afford to fail on his second assignment for the Demon Lord, so he decides to go to the bar in his head so he can clear his thoughts. However, this time he's not alone because Danuske's imaginary version of Allmandra is sitting at the table next to him, arguing with the bartender about which is cooler, gorillas or lions. Realistically, a gorilla is moping the floor with a lion any day of the week, but Allmandra counters saying lions are cooler because a group of lions is called a pride. As soon as Danuske hears this, he snaps out of his trance and he now has a foolproof idea of how to handle this. First thing the next morning, Danuske calls Allmandra outside and he apologizes for waking her up so early, but he needs her help so they can go do some negotiating. But for Danuske's plan to work, they need to go somewhere else first. And if all goes well, then Ogier is the one who will be begging for a negotiation meeting. 1 week later, Danuske and Olmundra are called into the chief's throne room, just like Danuske had planned, and Ogier looks pretty mad. He just found out that all the surrounding tribes formed an alliance with the demon army over the past week, and he wants an explanation. A week ago, Danuske told Olmundra about his plan to recruit the smaller tribes first instead of trying to convince Ogier. It shouldn't be too hard because, just like the Ogre tribe, the other tribes are struggling with a food shortage, so they can be swayed by the promise of support. Olmundra understood Danuske's plan, but she didn't expect it to work so well by forcing Ogier into negotiations. Danuske's strategy was based on something he had to do when he was selling a product back on Earth. If he tried to approach a big company directly, he would usually be rejected, so he decided to first market to all the smaller companies and sell them his product, and eventually the big company would be forced to contact him and ask for the product as well so they wouldn't be left behind. Similarly, if all the surrounding demi-humans joined the demon army, then the prideful chief wouldn't let that go without a response. For now, Danuske plays dumb and acts like he simply offered to form an alliance with the smaller groups because they were struggling to survive and needed the support of the demon army. But that makes Ogier even angrier since he never agreed to any negotiations. Everything is going according to plan because now that Ogier has lost his cool, he is much more susceptible to Danuske's negotiation tactics. Danuske then starts explaining that the alliances weren't formed by him alone because he had help from Olulu. Ogier can't believe that his own daughter would betray him like this, but she tells him that it was necessary for the sake of their Ogre tribe. The only way out of their current situation is to rely on the demon army's aid, and as much as he may not want to admit it, times have changed. He has grown old and is currently sick, so they need to join the demon army if they are going to survive. Just then, Danuske chimes in and offers an alternative to Ogier. Instead of joining the demon army, they could form an equal partnership. To be honest, Danuske just made that shit up because he hasn't changed anything about the deal. But if he says it's an equal partnership, then the proud Ogre chief is bound to be more willing to accept. As expected, Ogier doesn't seem opposed to the idea, but he asks them to give him some time to think it over. A couple of days later, Olmundra comes running into Danuske's office to tell him the good news. She tells Danuske that Ogier has just agreed to the alliance with the demon army, and that's great news. But right now, Danuske has more important things to worry about. The demon lord told him to pick out an assistant for himself, so he has spent the past few days looking through applications to find the right person. Honestly, he wishes he could just pick Olmundra since she's so reliable, and Olmundra misunderstands this to be Danuske's way of proposing, so she gets a little embarrassed. Just then, there's another knock at the door, so Danuske goes to check who it is and finds Olulu there. She tells him she's here to act as a representative from the Ogre tribe for their alliance with the demon army, and she's incredibly grateful to him for his help since her father has become a lot more diplomatic ever since their encounter. She says she is willing to do anything to show her gratitude, and since she said anything, Danuske asks her if she would like to become his personal assistant. Olulu is more than happy to take the job, but Olmundra is jealous, so she refuses to look Danuske in the eye and reminds herself that they are rivals, so she can't be friends with him. Danuske has no idea why she suddenly started acting so strange, but that aside, this has been a good month for him since the demon army has grown quite a bit. But whenever there's growth, there's also increased risk, so everyone needs to keep their guard up. This was the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.